I never told my daughter about my monthly $50,000 salary. She always saw me living simply. She invited me to dinner with her husband's parents. I wanted to see how they treat a poor person by pretending to be a ruined and naive mother. But as soon as I walked through the door, before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My life is a carefully composed piece of music. A quiet symphony played in a minor key. The melody is the rustle of tomato leaves in my garden. The harmony is the whisper of pages turning in a well-loved book. And the rhythm is the gentle, predictable cadence of a simple life. I live in a small two-bedroom bungalow, the same one my husband and I bought 40 years ago. My car is a dependable 10-year-old sedan. My greatest luxury is the organic soil I have delivered for my prize-winning roses. To my daughter, Kayla, this symphony of simplicity is a source of profound, unending embarrassment. She sees my life not as a choice but as a failure to strive, to accumulate, to become something more. She sees a poor widow living on a meager pension, a woman who peaked early as a mid-level programmer and then faded into obscurity. She has no idea that my quiet life is the most expensive luxury I have ever afforded myself. She has no idea that it is a fortress built to protect me from the very world she is so desperate to join. She does not know that every month, on the third business day, a single silent automated wire transfer deposits $50,000 into a bank account I rarely look at. It is my ghost, my secret, the echo of a life I burned so brightly in that I had to retreat to the shadows to let my eyes readjust. 30 years ago, I was not this quiet woman with soil under her fingernails. I was Dr. Imani Vance, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and terror in the server rooms and boardrooms of Silicon Valley. I was a software architect, a digital weaver of impossible things. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a relentless obsessive need to solve the puzzle. The puzzle back then was data. The digital world was exploding, and companies were drowning in it, their servers groaning under the weight of their own information. I spent 3 years of my life locked in a fever dream of code, building a new kind of reality. The result was a data compression algorithm I named Proteus, after the shape-shifting Greek god. It was more than just compression. It was a revolutionary new way of thinking about data, an elegant, almost sentient piece of code that could anticipate, learn, and adapt. It was, and I say this with the cool objective pride of a creator, a work of art. I sold the core patent to a consortium of tech giants in a deal that was at the time the largest of its kind, but I was smart. I was a systems analyst. After all, I retained a small, almost insignificant-looking licensing clause. A fractional percentage of the profits derived from any application that used Proteus as its core. A single grain of rice from every chessboard square. In the decades that followed, Proteus didn't just become the industry standard, it became the industry itself. It is the invisible architecture behind global banking systems, streaming services, social media platforms, and military-grade encryption. That single grain of rice has become a mountain of unimaginable size. The monthly royalty payment is not a salary, it is my share of the world's digital pulse. I walked away from it all the day my husband died. I looked at the vast empty mansion we had bought, at the fleet of luxury cars in the garage, at the life of frantic, meaningless accumulation we had built, and I felt nothing but a profound, suffocating emptiness. I had solved the puzzle of data, but I had missed the entire point of my own life. So I sold the mansion, I sold the cars, I put the vast majority of my fortune into a series of anonymous trusts and charitable foundations. I kept the bungalow, the garden, the books, and I built this quiet life, this symphony of small things. I never told Kayla. How could I explain to a child who had grown up with everything that my deepest desire was to have nothing? How could I make her understand that I had not retired from a job but had escaped from a prison my own making? So I let her believe the fiction. I let her see me as the simple, slightly naive mother who just didn't get her ambitious world. It was easier, it was kinder, or so I had always believed. But now she was about to invite that world into my quiet garden, and I was beginning to realize that my long, silent experiment in simplicity was about to collide with a very different kind of test. The phone call from Kayla came as it always did, with a prelude of anxious, audible sighs. It was her tell, the auditory signal that she was about to ask for something she was already embarrassed about. "Mom?" she began, her voice tight and strained. "Are you busy?" "Just pruning the roses, sweetheart," I said, picturing her in her stark, minimalist office, A place with so many sharp white angles it always made me feel like I was inside an eggshell. What's on your mind? More sighs. Okay, so look. Julian's parents are having a dinner party on Saturday. A small thing, very intimate. And they want you to come. The invitation was delivered with the same enthusiasm one might use to announce a root canal. Julian was my son-in-law, a well-meaning but utterly spineless man who had been absorbed into the gravitational field of his own family's wealth. His parents were Reginald and Victoria Harrison, a pair of private equity predators whose reputation preceded them like the thunder of an approaching storm. I had for 2 years successfully managed to avoid this meeting. Oh, I said, my voice neutral. That's nice of them. It's not nice, Mom. It's a command performance, she snapped, her anxiety boiling over into irritation. You don't understand. The Harrisons don't invite people. They summon them. This is a big deal. Their inner circle will be there. It's important to me that this goes well. I'm sure it will, I said calmly. No, you're not sure. That's the problem, she said, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial whisper, as if the Harrisons could hear us through the phone. We need to be on the same page. I need you to make a good impression. And there it was. The core of her shame, laid bare. Kayla, what does that mean? I asked. My voice still gentle. It means, dress up, she said, the words a frantic tumbling rush. Wear that black dress, the one I bought you for that wedding. Not one of your garden dresses. And jewelry. You need to wear some jewelry, and we need to go over the talking points. The talking points? I had to stop myself from laughing. Yes, the talking points. Stick to safe topics. The weather, the garden. Don't talk about, your old programming stuff. It's boring, and it makes you sound dated. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about money, obviously. Just be sweet. Be the sweet, simple mom I know. Let them see that you're harmless. Harmless. The word was a small, perfectly polished dagger. She wanted me to perform the role of the person she already believed me to be. A sweet, simple, harmless old woman, who wouldn't embarrass her in front of her new, powerful family. And Mom, she added, her voice now a desperate pleading whisper. Please, just for one night. Can you just try to fit in? I looked out my window at my beautiful, chaotic, authentic garden. I saw the bees buzzing around the lavender, the unruly tangle of the passion flower vine, the fierce, unapologetic red of my prize-winning roses. Nothing in my garden fit in. It all just grew, according to its own nature. I'll do my best, sweetheart, I said, the words a quiet, careful lie. I would do my best, but not to fit in. I would do my best to conduct a thorough and accurate assessment. The invitation had been issued. A test was about to be administered. But it was not me who was about to be graded. After I hung up the phone with Kayla, I did not feel angry. I did not feel hurt. The scientist in me, the part that had been dormant for a decade, was reawakening. Kayla's anxious, manipulative call was not an insult. It was a data point. It was the initial parameter for a perfectly contained, perfectly fascinating social experiment. The hypothesis was simple. How would a family whose entire value system was built on the acquisition and performance of wealth treat a person who represented the complete antithesis of that system? But my simple, quiet life wasn't a perfect variable. It was merely simple. It lacked the crucial element of tragedy, the stink of failure that people like the Harrisons could smell a mile away. To truly test their character, I needed to be more than just poor. I needed to be pathetic. I needed to be not just a woman of simple means, but a cautionary tale. I waited an hour, letting my new plan crystallize, and then I called Kayla back. I pitched my voice a little higher, adding a tremor of manufactured fragility. Kayla, honey? I began, my voice a breathy, nervous whisper. It's me. I'm so sorry to bother you again, but something terrible has happened. Mom? What is it? Are you okay? The alarm in her voice was genuine. For a moment, I don't know how to tell you this, I said, letting a small pathetic sob catch in my throat. It's my retirement money, my savings. It's all gone. What are you talking about? Gone where? I took a deep, shaky breath, preparing to deliver the masterstroke of my fiction. I met a man online. He seemed so nice. He was a financial advisor, and he told me about this incredible investment opportunity. A new kind of cryptocurrency. He said it was a sure thing, that I could double my nest egg in a month. I was just so lonely, and I wanted to have a little something extra. To not be a burden. So I invested everything. I let out another more convincing sob. And now he's gone. The website is gone. The money is all gone, Kayla. The silence on the other end of the line was a thing of deafening, horrified wait. I had just handed her the perfect, tragic, deeply embarrassing narrative. Her mother, her sweet, simple, naive mother, had not only been poor but had now been scammed out of her last few pennies by a con artist on the internet. It was the stuff of daytime television, a story of such pathetic low-rent failure that it would be a social death sentence in the Harrisons' world. "Oh, Mom," she finally breathed, her voice a mixture of pity and a kind of high-pitched panicked horror. "Oh my God, no. How could you be so stupid?" That was the word she was looking for. She was too polite to say it, but I could hear it. I know, I whimpered. I was a fool. I don't know what I'm going to do. The Social Security is barely enough to cover the mortgage. Okay, just don't do anything," she said, her voice now taking on the brisk, commanding tone of a PR agent managing a crisis. "Don't tell anyone about this. Oh God, the dinner is on Saturday. You can't tell them this." "But what if they ask?" I asked, my voice a picture of childlike helplessness. "They won't ask. Just stick to the talking points. The garden, the weather. If anyone asks how you are fine. You are enjoying your retirement. Do you understand? We will deal with the money thing later. For now, we just need to get through Saturday without a complete and total disaster." Her reaction was the final, crucial data point. Her first instinct was not compassion. It was not concern for my well-being. It was damage control. Her primary fear was not that her mother was destitute, but that this destitution would create an awkward social situation. The parameters of the experiment were now set. The test subject, the Harrison family system, was primed. I was no longer just the simple, harmless mother. I was the ruined, naive, and deeply embarrassing poor relation. I was the perfect litmus test for character, and I was about to be dropped into their pristine, carefully controlled environment. The results, I knew, would be fascinating. The Harrison mansion was not a home. It was a declaration of war against subtlety. It was a sprawling, vaguely Tuscan monstrosity of beige stucco and terracotta tiles, a building that screamed its own expense from every gabled roof and oversized Palladian window. The driveway was a paved expanse that could have landed a small aircraft, and the front door was a ridiculously ornate 10-foot-tall slab of carved mahogany. I pulled my 10-year-old sedan up behind a row of gleaming German luxury cars and took a deep breath. I was wearing the simple, tasteful, but undeniably inexpensive black dress Kayla had once bought me. My only adornment, the single strand of pearls from my husband. I had arranged my face into an expression of wide-eyed, slightly intimidated naivete. I was no longer Dr. Monty Vance. I was the ruined, pathetic mother, here to be judged. The door was opened by a uniformed butler who looked at my car, then at me, with an expression of barely concealed disdain. He led me into a grand cavernous foyer with a marble floor so polished I could see my own anxious counterfeit reflection in it. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident murmur of powerful people. Victoria Harrison, my daughter-in-law's mother-in-law, detached herself from a small group and glided towards me. She was a tall, unnervingly thin woman in a jewel-toned dress that probably cost more than my car. Her smile was a perfect predatory crescent. "Aman," she said, her voice a silken purr, "how lovely of you to come. Kayla has told us so much about you." The unspoken end of that sentence, and none of it good, hung in the air between us. Her husband, Reginald, a large, florid man with the eyes of a shark, joined her. He gave me a brisk, dismissive handshake. "Good of you to make it," he said, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Kayla and Julian rushed over, their faces tight with a shared frantic anxiety. "Mom, you're here," Kayla said, her laugh a little too high. A little too bright. She air-kissed me, her hands fluttering nervously around my simple dress, as if trying to physically smooth out its lack of a designer label. The experiment was proceeding exactly as planned. I was the object of their condescending pity, their barely veiled scorn. I was the poor relation, the social liability they had to endure for one painful evening. And then, in a single catastrophic moment, the entire carefully controlled experiment was compromised. Reginald, who had been impatiently trying to get back to his conversation, said, "You'll have to excuse me. I'm in the middle of a very delicate negotiation with Mr. Sterling." The name hit me like a physical blow. Sterling. There were 1,000 sterlings in the world. It couldn't be. But then, Reginald gestured towards the massive floor-to-ceiling fireplace that dominated the far wall of the living room. And I saw him. He was older, his hair now a distinguished silver. But he was unmistakable. He had the same intense, intelligent eyes, the same restless energy, the same aura of a man who operates on a plane of existence several levels above everyone else in the room. It was Michael Sterling, the brilliant, iconoclastic and now legendary tech billionaire who had been my first and most important business partner. The man who had stood beside me when we sold the Proteus algorithm, the man who knew better than anyone on the planet, the true, staggering scale of my genius and my wealth. He was the one impossible variable, the one anomaly my system had not accounted for. He was a ghost from my old life, standing in the heart of my new one, and he was about to blow my cover and my entire experiment to smithereens. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to slow down. I was frozen in the doorway, a ghost from one life staring at a ghost from another. Michael Sterling, a man I had not seen in person in almost a decade, was standing in my daughter's new living room, looking just as out of place in this world of private equity sharks and socialites as I was. He was deep in a tense, low-voiced conversation with Reginald, his expression a familiar mask of cool, analytical impatience. He was a predator in a different kind of jungle, and he looked thoroughly bored by the local fauna. Then his eyes, which were constantly scanning the room with a kind of restless systemic vigilance, landed on me. The change was instantaneous. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The cold, intimidating aura of the reclusive billionaire, the man the Harrisons had been courting for months, vanished. His face, which had been a mask of stone, broke into a smile of such genuine, unadulterated, beaming affection that it seemed to light up the entire cavernous room. "Amani," he exclaimed, his voice a warm, booming sound that cut through the polite murmur of the party like a thunderclap. He didn't hesitate. He abandoned a stunned and open-mouthed Reginald Harrison mid-sentence. He strode across the vast expanse of marble floor, his movements filled with a purpose and energy that had been absent just a moment before. He ignored the shocked, curious faces that turned to watch his progress. He came to a stop in front of me, his eyes shining with a warmth I had not felt in years. "My God," he said, his voice now a low, happy rumble. "It's really you. I didn't believe it when I saw your name on the guest list." Before I could even formulate a response, he wrapped me in a warm, strong hug, the kind of unself-conscious embrace shared between two old soldiers who had survived a war together. He smelled the same, a faint, clean scent of expensive soap, and something that was just uniquely him. "It's been too long, Ivy," he whispered in my ear, using my old programming handle, a name no one had called me in a decade. "Too damn long." He pulled back, his hands still resting on my shoulders, his smile a thing of pure, unalloyed joy. "You look wonderful," he said, his eyes scanning my simple dress and single strand of pearls, not with judgment, but with an appreciative understanding I knew no one else in this room could possess. "Peace suits you." The entire room was frozen in a state of utter, uncomprehending shock. The Harrisons, Kayla, Julian, they were a tableau of dropped jaws and wide staring eyes. They were like a primitive tribe that had just witnessed a rock turn into a bird. The social physics of their universe had just been fundamentally, inexplicably broken. They had spent the entire evening and months before that, trying to gain the attention and approval of the great Mr. Sterling. He in turn had treated them with a cool, dismissive disdain. And now this same man, this ghost of the financial world, was embracing their poor, embarrassing, naive relation with the warmth and affection of a long-lost brother. The collision was absolute. My carefully constructed world of quiet simplicity had just slammed, at high velocity, into the powerful, high-stakes world I had left behind. The two worlds were not supposed to touch. They were not supposed to coexist, but they were now, in the middle of the Harrisons' opulent living room, and the resulting explosion of social confusion was a thing of chaotic, beautiful and terrifying splendor. The experiment was no longer under my control. It had just gone critical. Victoria Harrison was the first to recover from the initial shockwave. She was a woman whose entire life was a series of strategic social maneuvers, and her instincts, though shallow, were sharp. She saw a situation that had spun out of her control, and her immediate priority was to reclaim it. She glided over to us, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. "Mr. Sterling," she cooed, her voice a silken, condescending purr. "I see you've met Kayla's mother. How lovely." The pause she inserted, the faint, almost imperceptible emphasis on the word mother, was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It was designed to re-establish the hierarchy. This is just the poor insignificant mother. Don't waste your valuable time on her. Let's get back to the important people, like us. She placed a proprietary hand on Sterling's arm, preparing to steer him away, back towards her husband, back towards the world where she was a person of consequence. It was a profound and, as it would turn out, fatal miscalculation. Sterling did not move. He looked down at her hand on his arm and then up at her face, with an expression of such cold, quiet amusement that she actually flinched and drew her hand back as if she'd touched a live wire. "Victoria," he said, his voice losing its warm, affectionate tone, and taking on the flat, dangerous quality of a man who does not suffer fools gladly. "I didn't just meet Amani. This woman taught me half of what I know about the digital world before you knew how to send an email." The insult was so swift, so clean, so utterly dismissive, that for a moment Victoria simply stood there, her painted smile frozen in place, her mind struggling to process the public rebuke. Sterling turned his back on her completely, a social execution of stunning brutality. He turned his full attention back to me, his arms still resting warmly on my shoulders. "I'm sorry, Imani," he said, his voice once again filled with genuine warmth. "These gatherings, not your scene, never was." Before I could respond, the butler announced that dinner was served. A small awkward dance began, as the guests started to move towards the grand dining room. Victoria, desperate to regain some semblance of control, began to direct people to their seats according to her meticulously planned chart. "Mr. Sterling, you are of course at the head of the table, next to Reginald," she announced, attempting to reassert her authority. Sterling shook his head. "No," he said. "The word is simple, non-negotiable statement of fact." He looked at me. "Umani and I have a decade of catching up to do. We'll sit together." He began to lead me towards the dining room, not to the head of the table but to a smaller two-person table that had clearly been intended for a pair of junior insignificant guests. It was, in a final beautiful irony, positioned in a quiet, out-of-the-way corner much like the one I had anticipated they would hide me in. He pulled out a chair for me, a gesture of old-world gallantry. "This will do nicely," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby Harrisons to hear. A little pocket of sanity in the midst of all this noise. He had not just derailed her seating chart, he had hijacked her entire party. He had, in the space of 5 minutes, completely dismantled the social hierarchy she had so carefully constructed. He had publicly rebuked her, insulted her, and then chosen the company of her most embarrassing guest over all the powerful people she had assembled. The Harrisons, Kayla and Julian, were left standing in the foyer, their faces a mixture of fury, humiliation and a dawning terrible sense of a catastrophe they could not yet define. The test had begun, but the subjects were no longer just being observed. They were actively and with a masterful surgical precision being dissected. The dining room was a theater of opulence. A single monstrously long table of polished mahogany stretched the length of the room, groaning under the weight of a forest of crystal glasses, a fleet of sterling silver and a series of floral arrangements so large they were a genuine fire hazard. The air was thick with the scent of money and roasted duck. Silas and I were an island of quiet rebellion in our corner. The Harrisons, after a frantic whispered conference, had been forced to adapt. They had given up trying to move Silas and had instead entered a state of panicked, obsequious deference. A team of waiters descended upon our small table, offering us the best wine, the first choice of every dish, their movements filled with a nervous, fawning energy. The rest of the table was a study in social anxiety. The conversation was strained, punctuated by the forced, brittle laughter of people who are desperately trying to pretend that nothing is wrong. All eyes kept flicking towards our corner, trying to decipher the impossible social equation that was playing out before them. Reginald Harrison, however, was a fighter. He was a man who had built his fortune on hostile takeovers, and he was not going to surrender his own dinner party without a fight. He saw my presence as an unfortunate anomaly, but he also saw it as an opportunity. He believed he could use me to bond with Silas, to create a sense of shared superior understanding at the expense of the simple, naive woman Silas had, for some bizarre reason, taken under his wing. He waited for a lull in the conversation, then leaned down the table, his voice a booming, patronizing sound designed to capture everyone's attention. "So, Imani," he began, a smug conspiratorial smile on his face. "With your recent financial troubles, it must be a bit overwhelming to be surrounded by all this market talk." Kayla, sitting next to him, flinched as if he had struck her. My carefully planted lie, my tragic story of being scammed, had clearly been shared. It was now being deployed as a weapon against me. Reginald continued, his eyes twinkling with a cruel self-satisfied amusement. Tell me from your perspective, what's your take on the current volatility in the tech sector? Worried about your social security check, are you? He winked, a broad, vulgar wink, at Silas. It was a clear, unmistakable signal. Let's have some fun with the simpleton. You and I, we're in on the joke, we're the smart ones here. He had just made the single greatest miscalculation of his entire vainglorious life. He thought he was baiting me. He had no idea he was baiting a sleeping dragon. I had prepared for this. I had a whole persona ready. I was going to give a rambling, nonsensical answer about the internet being like a big cloud. I was going to play the part of the naive, ruined mother to perfection. But before I could even open my mouth to deliver my rehearsed lines, a new unexpected sound cut through the room. It was Silas. And he was laughing. It was not a warm, amused laugh. It was a cold, sharp, dangerous sound. It was the sound of a blade being unsheathed. He put down his wine glass, a slow, deliberate movement, and fixed Reginald with a look of pure, unadulterated, predatory glee. The test had begun, and the chief examiner was no longer me. It was him. Silas's laugh, cold and sharp, sliced through the strained atmosphere of the dining room, leaving a trail of stunned silence in its wake. Every head turned towards him. Reginald Harrison's smug, condescending smile faltered, replaced by a look of confused uncertainty. He had expected Silas to join in on the joke, not to become the source of a new, more dangerous one. Silas leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement. He picked up his wine glass and swirled the deep red liquid, his eyes filled with a cold, glittering amusement, never leaving Reginald's face. Reginald, Silas said, his voice a low conversational purr that was somehow more menacing than any shout. I have to admit I'm fascinated. I've been in boardrooms with you. I've seen you tear apart a balance sheet. I always assumed you were a man who did his due diligence. But this is a level of unpreparedness I find genuinely astonishing. Reginald's face began to flush a deep, ugly red. I'm not sure I follow, Silas, he stammered, his bravado rapidly deflating. You're seriously asking her about market volatility? Silas continued, a note of incredulous theatrical wonder in his voice. He gestured towards me with his glass. You are asking Ivy about the tech sector. He said the two letters Iva, with a kind of nostalgic insider's reverence, a name from a secret, exclusive club that no one else at the table was a member of. The name, my old programming handle, felt like a ghost on my own tongue. Silas took a slow sip of his wine, letting the tension build. Reginald, he said, setting the glass down with a soft, deliberate click. Let me give you a little history lesson. 25 years ago, when your firm was still a grubby little boutique outfit buying up distressed textile mills, this woman, Dr. Imani Vance, was the lead architect on a project that would go on to define the next quarter century of the digital economy. You're worried about market volatility. This is the woman who wrote the predictive modeling that anticipated the dot-com crash 18 months before it happened. She did it for fun on a weekend. He let that statement hang in the air, a grenade whose pin he had just pulled. He wasn't finished. You're a man who values brands, aren't you, Reginald? You love a good, powerful name. So let me give you one, Proteus. The name landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Proteus. It was not just a name, it was a legend. The philosopher's stone of the tech world. The foundational algorithm upon which a trillion-dollar industry had been built. Every single person at that table, from the private equity sharks to their socialite wives, knew that name. It was synonymous with a level of genius, and a level of wealth, that was almost mythical. The Proteus algorithm, Silas said, his voice now a quiet, devastating whisper, was not created by a team of engineers at a multinational corporation. It was born in a garage, in the mind of one woman, who saw the future more clearly than any of us. You're asking her for her take on the tech sector, Reginald. You are a man standing at the base of Mount Everest, asking the mountain for its opinion on a small hill. A look of dawning, sickening, catastrophic horror was spreading across Reginald Harrison's face. He was connecting the dots. The impossible, unthinkable dots. The reclusive, mythical architect of Proteus, a figure as elusive and as powerful as any god in his financial pantheon, was a sweet, simple woman named Imani Vance. And he had just asked her if she was worried about her social security check. The first shockwave had hit. The foundations of his world, of his own self-perceived importance, were beginning to crumble, and the earthquake had only just begun. The revelation that I was connected to the legendary Proteus algorithm had plunged the room into a state of stunned, horrified silence. Reginald Harrison looked as if he had seen a ghost. Victoria's face was a frozen mask of disbelief. Julian, my son-in-law, was staring at me with the wide, uncomprehending eyes of a child who has just discovered their parent is a superhero. But it was Kayla's reaction that I was watching. My daughter, her face was a chaotic, unreadable storm of emotions. Shock, confusion, but underneath it all, a familiar, terrible, rising tide of social panic. She was not proud. She was not amazed. She was terrified. This impossible revelation was a disruption to her carefully managed narrative, and her only instinct was to control it, to smooth it over, to put the terrifying, powerful genie back in its simple, harmless bottle. She let out a small, high-pitched, desperately forced laugh. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you're such a kidder," she said, her voice a brittle, fragile thing. She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of frantic, performative nonchalance. "You're embarrassing my mom." "He's just being kind," Reginald, giving her a little too much credit. She was trying to save them, she was trying to save herself. And she was about to do it by publicly sacrificing me. She turned to me, her eyes pleading with me to play along, to go back to the role of the sweet, simple mother. "Mom doesn't really follow all that complicated tech stuff anymore. Do you, Mom?" she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "She has other interests now. Her garden." And then, she delivered the final fatal blow. The ultimate act of betrayal. She looked at Reginald and Victoria, her new more important family, and gave them a small, apologetic, conspiratorial smile, as if to say, "Please forgive her, she's not one of us." "Like I told you," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper that was intended for the whole table to hear. "She's been having a bit of a hard time lately. She recently had some bad luck with an online investment. She's not really herself. She had done it. She had confirmed the lie. She had publicly, in front of the one man who knew the absolute truth, validated the story of my pathetic, naive ruin. She had chosen in that critical, defining moment to align herself with the Harrisons in their world of shallow, judgmental artifice rather than with her own mother. She had thrown me under the bus to save herself from a moment of social awkwardness. It was the most devastating data point of the entire experiment. The test was no longer about the Harrisons. They were a known quantity, a predictable system of arrogance and condescension. The test was now about my daughter, and the results were in. I looked at Kayla, this stranger, with my eyes and my blood, and I felt a profound tectonic shift inside of me. The love, the patience, the endless well of forgiveness I had always held for her did not vanish, but it was suddenly, irrevocably overlaid with a thick, cold layer of ice. She had made her choice, she had failed the test, and now she would have to face the consequences. I did not have to deliver them. Silas, I could see, was about to do it for me. The moment the words left Kayla's mouth, the atmosphere in the room changed. The amused, predatory glint in Silas Sterling's eyes vanished, replaced by a stillness so profound, so absolute, that it was terrifying. The warmth he had shown me, the affection of an old friend, was gone. The man sitting in that chair was no longer my partner, Michael. He was Mr. Sterling, the architect, the man who built and broke fortunes, and he was about to do his work. He turned his head slowly, and looked at my daughter. He did not look at her with anger. He looked at her with a kind of cold, clinical, and utterly annihilating contempt. It was the look a god might give an insect that had briefly annoyed him. "Bad luck?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet, a low, lethal hum that cut through the silence of the room. He let the words hang in the air, a final damning echo of her betrayal. He then turned his gaze back to Reginald. But he was speaking to the entire table. He was speaking to history. "Let me be perfectly crystal clear," he began, his voice the calm, precise instrument of a surgeon about to make a fatal incision. "Dr. Imani Vance does not have bad luck," he stated, his emphasis on my title a deliberate, pointed correction. "She is a systems analyst of a caliber that makes luck an irrelevant concept. The very online investment scams your daughter is so carelessly referring to. Dr. Vance designed the foundational fraud detection algorithms that the entire global banking system uses to identify and neutralize those scams. She doesn't fall for traps. She builds them." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. He was not just defending me, he was re-establishing my credentials, rebuilding the legend they had tried to dismiss. "In Kayla," he said, his eyes flicking back to my daughter for a single devastating moment. "Your mother does not have a monthly salary. Your mother is the anonymous sole proprietor of the licensing rights for the Proteus algorithm. That monthly $50,000 that you don't know about is a fractional, almost insultingly small percentage of the passive income she receives from every major tech company on the planet, including," he added, his gaze now locking onto Reginald, "the company that manages your own firm's data infrastructure, Reginald." The second shockwave hit, a tsunami of information so staggering, so world-altering that it left the entire room breathless. I was not just connected to Proteus, I was Proteus. I was not just wealthy, I was a foundational part of the very economic system they all worshipped. Reginald Harrison's face, which had been red with embarrassment, was now a pale, sickly ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just been informed that the small, unassuming building he had been trying to demolish was in fact the central bank of the entire country. Kayla was no longer looking at anyone. She was staring down at her plate, her face a mask of pure soul-shattering public shame. The sweet, simple, harmless mother she had been so desperate to hide, to manage, to control, was a titan, a quiet, hidden giant, and she, in her blind, desperate insecurity, had not just insulted her, she had publicly, in front of the entire world that mattered to her, revealed her own profound, unforgivable ignorance. She had not managed a social crisis. She had become one. The revelation of my identity and the true scale of my wealth had left a crater of stunned silence in the middle of the dining room. Reginald Harrison looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. His son Julian was staring at his wife, Kayla, with a new horrified understanding of the catastrophic social miscalculation she had led him into. Victoria Harrison's face was a frozen, botoxed mask of pure, unadulterated terror. But Silas Sterling was not a man who left a job half-finished. He had exposed the rot, now he was going to cut it out. He stood up, a slow, deliberate movement that drew every eye in the room. He calmly placed his linen napkin on the table beside his plate. A gesture of finality, of a meal, and a relationship concluded. "Reginald," he said, his voice no longer quiet, but ringing with the clear, cold authority of a CEO addressing a board of directors he was about to fire. "For the past 6 months your firm has been aggressively courting my investment group. You have been proposing a merger, a chance to partner with my capital to expand your operations globally. I have been listening. I have been considering your proposal." He paused, letting a sliver of desperate, pathetic hope enter Reginald's terrified eyes. "My decision," Silas continued, his voice dropping to a flat, emotionless tone, "is now made." He looked around the table at the powerful, influential guests who were the pillars of Reginald's world. He was not just speaking to Reginald, he was speaking to the entire financial community. He was delivering a verdict that would echo through the markets for years to come. "I have a non-negotiable, foundational policy in all of my business dealings," he announced, his voice like chipping ice. "I do not do business with men who lack judgment. And I do not do business with men who lack character." He looked directly at Reginald, his eyes a pair of cold, dead black stones. "Tonight you have demonstrated a catastrophic failure on both fronts. You lack the judgment to recognize a titan of industry when she is sitting at your own table, and you lack the character to treat a good and decent person, regardless of her perceived station, with basic human decency." He let the indictment hang in the air, a public, damning, and utterly unassailable judgment. "The deal is off," he stated, the words a clean, brutal execution. "We are done. Furthermore, I will be advising my extensive network of partners and associates to reconsider any and all of their current and future dealings with Harrison Equity. Your brand, as of this moment, is tainted by a profound lack of vision and a fundamental weakness of character. I suspect you will find the market correcting for that accordingly, in the coming days." He had not just killed the deal. He had publicly blacklisted him. He had taken Reginald Harrison's carefully constructed empire of new money, and declared it in front of his entire world to be a house built on a foundation of sand, with a fool as its architect. Reginald Harrison, the ruthless private equity titan, the man who had built his career on destroying others, just sat there utterly, completely, and silently, destroyed. He was a king who had just been stripped naked in his own court, and he had no one to blame but himself. With the financial execution complete and Reginald Harrison reduced to a hollow, gray-faced shell of a man, Silas Sterling's part in the evening's drama was over. He had rendered his verdict on the House of Harrison, All that remained was my verdict on the House of Vance. As Silas prepared to leave, I stood as well. The room was still a tomb of shocked silence. All eyes were on me. They were waiting for the final act. The emotional, messy confrontation between the powerful hidden mother and the shamed, exposed daughter. They were expecting a storm. I would give them a quiet, devastating frost. I finally turned my full attention to Kayla. She was still staring at her plate, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. She was a picture of absolute soul-crushing humiliation. She had not just made a mistake. She had committed a form of spiritual suicide, sacrificing her own integrity on the altar of her in-laws' approval, only to discover that they were false gods and she had worshipped in vain. I walked the length of the long, silent table until I was standing behind her chair. I did not touch her. I did not raise my voice. I spoke softly, my voice intended for her ears alone, but in the profound silence of the room, every word was a gunshot. It was a test. Kayla, I said, my voice not angry, not triumphant, but filled with a deep, profound and heartbreaking sorrow. It was all a test. I wanted to see who you had become. I wanted to see if the values your father and I tried to teach you, the values of kindness, of character, of seeing the worth in a person, not in their wallet, had survived in this new world of yours. She looked up at me then, her face a mess of tears and mascara, her eyes a pair of gaping, wounded pools of shame. She saw not the fury she deserved, but the disappointment she had earned, and she knew in that moment that it was infinitely worse. I gave them a false variable, I continued, my voice still a quiet, clinical whisper, the voice of the systems analyst I had always been. I presented them with a problem, a poor, naive, ruined mother, a social liability, and they reacted exactly as their system is designed to react, with condescension, with cruelty, with disdain. I paused, letting the truth of her world settle upon her. But the test was never really about them. They were a predictable outcome. The test was about you. I looked into her eyes, and I delivered the final devastating finding of my long and painful experiment. You failed it. The 3 words were not a shout. They were a quiet, surgical incision into the heart of her betrayal. They were not an accusation, they were a conclusion, a final, unappealable judgment on her character. I had given her a choice: to stand with her mother, in all her perceived weakness and poverty, or to stand with the Harrisons, in all their glittering, hollow power. And she had chosen wrong. She had failed the one test that had ever truly mattered. I saw the last flicker of hope die in her eyes. She understood. The gate on our relationship, the one that had always been open, the one she had always taken for granted, had just been closed. And she was on the wrong side of it. I did not wait for her response. There was nothing more to be said. The experiment was over. The conclusion had been presented. The judgment was final. I turned away from my weeping, broken daughter and walked to the head of the table where Silas was waiting. He gave me a small, sad, understanding nod. He had not just witnessed a financial execution, he had witnessed a maternal one, and he understood the profound, terrible cost of it. Together we walked out of the dining room. Our footsteps echoed in the vast, tomb-like silence of the house. No one spoke. No one tried to stop us. We were 2 ghosts from a different world, a world of substance and integrity, and we were simply passing through this shallow, theatrical illusion they called a life. As we crossed the grand, marble-floored foyer, I saw the wreckage we were leaving in our wake. The powerful guests were frozen in their seats, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and a kind of morbid, fascinated glee. They had come for a dinner party and had instead been given a front-row seat to a public hanging. Reginald and Victoria Harrison were still at the table. 2 statues carved from shame and fury. Their dream of a merger with Silas Sterling was dead. Their social standing, so carefully, ruthlessly cultivated, was now compromised, tainted by the story that would inevitably spread like wildfire through their community. The story of how they had insulted a titan of industry by mistreating a woman they thought was a nobody. And my daughter Kayla was still at the table, her head in her hands, her world reduced to the small, miserable space she occupied. Her husband Julian sat beside her, not comforting her but staring at her with an expression of dawning, horrified resentment. He had married her, in part for the social and financial security her family represented in his own world. He had just discovered that he had not married into a dynasty. He had married the daughter of an empress his own family had just declared war on. Their marriage, I knew, would likely not survive the fallout. The uniformed butler, his face pale and his professional composure shattered, rushed to open the massive front door for us. He looked at me with a new terrified respect. He had seen me arrive as a poor relation. He now saw me for what I was, the quiet, unassuming eye of a hurricane. Silas and I stepped out into the cool, clean night air. The row of gleaming, expensive cars still lined the driveway. The house was still ablaze with 1,000 glittering lights. But the party was over. The illusion had been shattered. We walked in silence to Silas's car, a simple, elegant, dark sedan that was, I knew, probably armored and equipped with a communications system that could rival the Pentagon's. His driver held the door for me. As I got in, I took one last look back at the house. This grand, soulless monument to empty ambition. I had come here to conduct a small, quiet test. I had not intended to lay waste to an entire family, but they, in their arrogance and their cruelty, had handed me the matches and pointed the way to the gasoline. And my daughter, my own daughter, had been the one to light the fuse. Weeks passed. The silence from the Harrison family was absolute. The silence from my daughter was a heavy, aching void. The story of the disastrous dinner party I heard from a few old contacts had become the stuff of legend in the city's financial and social circles. Harrison Equities stock had taken a significant hit. Several of Reginald's key partners had quietly pulled their investments. His empire was not destroyed, but it was wounded, his reputation permanently scarred. I returned to my quiet symphony. I tended my garden. I read my books. The monthly royalty payments continued their silent, inexorable arrival. But the peace I had cultivated for a decade was different now. It was overlaid with a thin, persistent layer of sorrow. The satisfaction of the justice I had delivered was a cold, bitter thing. I had won the battle, but the cost had been my own child. One Saturday morning, as I was on my knees in the dirt, carefully weeding around the base of my rose bushes, a shadow fell over me. I looked up. It was Kayla. She was not the polished, anxious, designer-clad woman from the dinner party. She was dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and her eyes were puffy but clear. She looked younger, more fragile, and more real than I had seen her in years. She did not speak. She just stood there a few feet away, her hands twisted together in front of her. She looked like a lost child who had finally found her way home, but was terrified to knock on the door. I did not speak either, I simply waited. This was her move, her choice. Finally, she took a shaky breath. She did not say she was sorry. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not make excuses. She asked a single simple profound question. "Can I help you with the garden?" Her voice was quiet, stripped of all its old, brittle defenses. It was the voice of a person who had been humbled, who had been broken down to her very foundations and was now looking for a single solid thing to build upon. I looked at her, at my daughter, this stranger I had raised, and in her eyes I saw not the shame of her failure, but the first faint flickering glimmer of a desire to learn, a desire to understand a different kind of value. I did not smile. I did not rush to embrace her. The wound was too deep for a simple bandage. But I reached over to the small pile of tools beside me, and I picked up a simple wooden-handled trowel. I held it out to her. She looked at the trowel, at its dirt-caked blade, and then back at my face. She understood. This was not an act of forgiveness. It was an invitation to start the long, hard, dirty work of rebuilding from the ground up. She stepped forward, her expensive sneakers sinking into the soft soil of my garden, and she took the trowel from my hand. She had lost the financial inheritance she had never known about, the millions of dollars she would never see. But in that moment, as she knelt in the dirt beside me, she had just taken the first, tentative step towards earning the only inheritance I had ever truly wanted for her, the inheritance of her own, hard-won and finally authentic character.